All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the second annual virtual award ceremony for NCSE's Friend of Darwin and Friend of the Planet Awards. My name is Ann Reed. I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Science Education, and I'm really thrilled to be the MC for this event. Let me just give you a little background as to why we have these awards. NCSE has been around for almost 40 years. It'll be 40 years in 2022. And our mission is to make sure that what kids learn in their school classrooms about evolution and climate change is accurate and that the education they get about it is effective so that their misconceptions about those topics are resolved. And it's a big job. Our survey work shows that depending on the topic, 30 to 40% of US middle school and high school teachers are in one way or another misrepresenting these areas of science or sending their students mixed messages. So our mission is to try to solve that problem. But I think as you all have recognized over the last year and a half, there's a real problem with science literacy well outside the science classroom and well outside the topics of evolution and climate change. We have apparently a pretty large population that really doesn't understand how science works, and that leaves them very vulnerable to misinformation and conspiracy theories, and that endangers all of us. And so this task that NCSE has, this little slice of the problem of fixing what's going on in science classrooms, is just one small part of an enormous whole. And obviously, we can't do it alone. And so every year, we like to draw some attention to the people out there in the world who are really contributing to the same battle that we're fighting of trying to help people understand evolution and climate change in particular. And so that is why we have gathered these. We have 6 awardees this year. 5 of them are with us. And that is why they were chosen, because we feel like these are people who are really helping us solve this big problem. So what we're going to do today is Glenn Branch, who's the Deputy Director of the National Center for Science Education, and I are going to take turns introducing the awardees. And, um, and after each introduction, we will give that awardee a few minutes to talk about why they care about this area of science and what maybe a little bit about what got them involved in trying to communicate to the wider public. Because I should say that all of these people have day jobs. Science communication is not their full-time occupation, and yet all of them have made time, a lot of time, to devote to this work. And so they can talk about whatever they want for a few minutes. But I think that we'd all be interested to hear, what got them started in doing communication and what they find rewarding about it. So I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing Dr. Mohamed Noor. He is the Dean of Natural Sciences and a professor of biology at Duke University. And as an old University of Maryland Terps fan, I will forgive him for his affiliation. Um, in his research, he strives to understand what genetic changes contribute to the formation of new species, what maintains fitness-related variation in natural populations, and how the process of genetic recombination affects both species formation and molecular evolution. And if you didn't understand that, that's because you didn't get a good evolution education in high school, and we're going to fix that for the next generation. Noor he's very active in education and outreach. He uses Star Trek, for example, to teach evolution concepts. Dr. Noor is a recipient of the Darwin Wallace Medal and author of, among other publications, Live Long and Evolve. Mohamed?
Well, thank you very much for that very generous introduction, and thank you for this recognition. It's a huge honor. I'm actually going to deviate a little bit from the instructions, and I want to actually take this moment to thank you all at NCSE for all you do to promote science literacy. I mean, obviously, the area with which I'm most familiar is on the teaching of evolution, and your organization has been this unwavering advocate, as you mentioned, for decades, both with teacher support and with mustering action against misinformation, for which there is a lot in evolution. And your efforts have been really, really successful. I mean, you mentioned a couple of numbers there, but I have to stress, despite y'all being more constrained in budget than a certain organization based in Seattle that will remain nameless, A recent study, which had some participants from NCSE, showed an increase in public acceptance of evolution as fact relative to previous decades, with it now being consistently accepted by more than half of Americans. That is huge. And I have no doubt that your advocacy for science and your support of science teaching contributed to that advance. And this is especially important right now when we're facing a pandemic and there's so much science misinformation out there. When we're seeing all these things related to the COVID variants, that is evolution. We need people to understand it, and we need efforts like yours to save humanity from itself. So anyway, I just want to say I appreciate everything you do in this area, and also more broadly in other critical areas such as climate science, also incredibly important. Y'all are amazing, and y'all deserve all the honors and recognition. So thank you again for all that you do.
I promise we didn't send, he has not been compensated for that shout out. Thank you so much. That's really very kind of you.
Next up is Brianna Popener, who is an paleoanthropologist whose research centers on the evolution of human diet with a focus on meat eating, but has included topics as diverse as human cannibalism and chimpanzee carnivory. So it really is all about meat eating. She leads the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History's Human Origins Programs, public programs, website content, social media, and exhibition volunteer training. And throughout, she has demonstrated a profound commitment to bringing human evolution to formal and informal educational settings alike. Brianna?
So I also really want to start by thanking NCSE for this honor. And fun fact about my relationship with NCSE, I was first made aware of the National Center for Science Education when I was receiving my PhD in 2007 from Rutgers University. And Jeannie Scott, who was the original, I think, founder and led the organization initially, was actually getting an honorary doctorate. And I thought, what is this NCSE place? So that's how I started to learn about the organization. I'm really grateful to have been invited by Rick Potts to join the Human Origins Program to lead these human evolution education and outreach efforts. I'm grateful to the teams that I work with. I certainly don't do everything that I do alone. My research collaborators on the evolution education projects that I work on, the high school biology teachers that I work with, who are really on the front lines of interfacing with students and teaching evolution. And volunteers who interface with visitors every day in our Hall of Human Origins at the Natural History Museum. And, I think, it's useful to talk about numbers and data, but what I really like to talk more about are the stories about connections with people. And I think that, inspiring the next generation, not only of scientists, but particularly of well-informed, critical thinking, science-friendly global citizens is what keeps me going in what I do. So I often like to tell stories about the student who wandered into the Midwestern Public Library, where a traveling version of our Hall of Human Origins was, came up to me, and after he heard me giving a tour of our library exhibit, our Human Origins library exhibit, to librarians, and said, "Can I just ask you a couple of questions?" And we had a wonderful hour-long conversations where he was clearly expressing, I think, some standard anti-evolution viewpoints, but really from a place of struggle. And at the end of it, he just said, I've never had a place where I can ask these questions. So I think, creating spaces to have safe conversations. The mom who came into the Natural History Museum when I was doing a public program, and came up to me and said, "Well, so you believe this evolution stuff?" And we had a really great conversation, and her daughters who were next to her, what I wanted to do in that interaction is have them walk away feeling respected, feeling like they could be a part of the scientific endeavor, not feeling afraid of science. And so, there's nothing to me like building a bridge, lowering the temperature, making someone feel welcome, lighting a spark in a child's eyes, and showing them that they can be a part of the scientific endeavor. So I guess that's what the motivation behind why I do what I do. But also, again, thank you so much for this honor, and yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks, Brianna. I heard Brianna give a talk at the National Association of Biology Teachers years ago. I think it was my first or second year. at NCSE, and it was called The Real Paleo Diet, and it was fantastic.
Thank you.
You have a real gift for telling stories in a way that leaves people, really understanding the science better. It's really great. And
Oh,
what you
thank
said
you, Anne.
about respect and empathy, that, if we are going to break through misconceptions, and this is what we tell our teachers, although generally teachers know this already, you have to let your students know that you respect them and it's safe to ask questions. So that attitude really goes across all areas of science communication. And fortunately, this internet, Twitter, Facebook really, really lends itself to respectful, deep conversations. So I think the problem will probably be solved really soon. So I would like now to introduce Jason Wiles, our third winner of the Friend of Darwin Award this year. He is Associate Professor of Biology at Syracuse University, and his interests include teaching and learning about biological evolution, doing research into that, increasing diversity among students and professionals in STEM fields and in science education at all academic levels. We recognize Jason also for his advocacy for evolution education and accurate and effective science education in his native Arkansas. Jason, thank you for all that you do and all that you research. We rely on it heavily.
Well, thank you, Anne, and thanks so much for this. This is quite something, and it's intact now. A friend of mine had heard that I'd won a Darwin Award, and he was really concerned that I had died in some grandly spectacular way. And I had to explain to him that no, I hadn't won the Darwin Award, but a Friend of Darwin Award. And he said, "Friend of Darwin? What does that mean?" That's a good question. What does it mean for the National Center for Science Education to name you a Friend of Darwin? I mean, I don't know if I would have been a friend of Darwin. Sure, he was a product of his time, but I certainly don't share his outlook on gender and race and other things like that. But I am really grateful for his work, particularly his foundational work on evolution by way of natural selection. And I'm very grateful for this work because I understand its importance in biology and related science, and because I know very well the deficiencies in science education when evolution isn't included. I grew up in rural Arkansas where evolution was entirely absent from my public school experience. And I earned an undergraduate degree in biology at a university in Arkansas that did not teach about evolution. So it was a bombshell of a wake-up call when I went to graduate school, this time in Oregon. But I discovered that evolution was very much in reality the very cornerstone of biology. And it was a very difficult transition for me as I came to understand and accept evolution. But it was liberating as well to have such a powerful tool for understanding the diversity of life and how living things work, and how it's an explanation for why organisms and ecosystems work the way they do. So I started to become a little bit angry. Well, pretty angry, in fact, at having been deprived of this knowledge for so long. So I decided to do what I could to help ensure that teachers would, and do teach evolution. I wanted to contribute to a broader understanding of how to teach and communicate about evolution, especially for people who might find it frightening, like I used to. In my work at McGill University, and since then, working toward an understanding of the factors that influence acceptance of evolution, toward engaging students and the public about evolution, and toward promoting the teaching of evolution in Arkansas and elsewhere, I found no greater ally than the National Center for Science Education and its staff and supporters. And that word ally, that's a pretty important one. In my work toward equity and inclusion and social justice in STEM, I've come to understand the word ally as one that can't be merely claimed. If you want to be an ally, you have to act as an ally. And if those that you're seeking to support see you as an ally, then it's because of consistent action instead of self-application of the term. And to me, Friend of Darwin is somewhat similar. For 20 years now, I've been doing what I can to support evolution education, and I've seen some of my heroes in this field. Many are now dear friends who've been awarded the Friend of Darwin. People like Susan Epperson, Bill McComas, and Patricia Princehouse, and Wes Ellsbury, Barbara Forrest, and Michael Zimmerman, Kenneth Miller, and now Brianna Popener and Mohamed Noor, so many others, including my own PhD advisor, Brian Alters, who, when I was a graduate student, I was so proud to present him with this award on behalf of NCSE, and that the NCSE board has voted to put me among these defenders of evolution education. That's an honor I don't really feel equipped to express. I hope I can continue to act as an ally to science education in ways that approach their great contributions, but thank you so much. I'm very deeply honored.
Thank you, Jason. I'm feeling a little teary. That was really beautiful. Thank you. So now we're going to turn to the Friend of the Planet Awards. We added this award about 10 years ago, I believe, when we added climate change education to our mission. So Glenn is going to introduce the first Friend of the Planet awardee.
Marshall Shepard is the Georgia Athletic Association Distinguished Professor of Geography and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Georgia. His research focuses primarily on hydrometeorological extremes, urban climate, and the intersections of atmospheric sciences with society. But that's not all. Shepard is also a highly successful communicator about both weather and climate. He's the host of the Weather Channel's Weather Geeks and is a regular contributor to Forbes magazine. Marshall?
Well, thank you all. And again, I want to join the litany of thanks for NCSE for honoring me with this award. In fact, I am going to do something since you mentioned Forbes and I am a communicator. I just dropped into the chat box an article I recently wrote in Forbes magazine. And I was looking at the sort of mood and temperature of the day where we see protests happening in school board rooms, and we see challenges to the science on vaccines and climate change and evolution. And so I wrote an article noting, are we going to see parents storming into school boards protesting about teaching of climate change and evolution? And I directly referenced NCSE in that article because this organization serves as a valuable resource for people like me. As was mentioned earlier, I have a day job as a professor at the University of Georgia and a director of the Atmospheric Sciences program there. But several years ago, during my tenure as a scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, I was asked to give an interview on the Today Show, I believe, or some national show about wildfires. And I told the NASA science public outreach person, I was like, I'm a weather climate person, I'm not an expert. And he said, relative to the audience you'll be talking to, you know enough about wildfires that you can talk about wildfires. And that point resonated with me. And I wrote something years later in Nature, somewhere along the line, saying, as scholars, it's important that we get ourselves outside of the ivory tower. Because if we don't, people with agendas and with the ideology and misinformation are happy to fill the void that we leave behind. And as a climate scientist, I see that almost every day. It's December, we're headed into the winter. Before the winter is out, I will receive multiple tweets from people saying, hey, Dr. Shepard, what are you guys talking about climate change? It's 35 degrees where I am and snowing. I've got 20 inches of global warming in my yard. I'll hear those types of comments and it's cute and I'll laugh. And I said, well, you're in Boston in January. You're going to get cold weather and snow. We're not going to stop having winter because of climate change. But it just illustrates that people don't understand things like the difference between weather and climate. I often say weather is your mood, climate is your personality, to try to illustrate the differences in terms of how one day's weather doesn't say anything about climate. And so my point here is to be in the company of others that have dedicated part of their career, part of their mission to increasing science literacy and science education and assuring that the information that is passed on to the next generation. I have 2 kids in high school. It's important to me. And so I'm honored to be affiliated with and recognize by this organization. We have a lot of work to do. We have to change the narrative in scholarly and academic circles that this is extra stuff. Those of us in the academy know that the metrics for success and promotion and tenure and so forth are how many papers did you write, how many grants did you receive, and so forth. I argue that public engagement, outreach, and increased science literacy is not extra stuff that we find time to do. It's a part of our core mission. And so on that note, I just want to thank you all, and I'm glad to be a part of this organization's awardees this year.
Thank you so much, Marshall. Yeah, the incentive system in academia is not very well aligned to solving some of these problems. So we are doubly thankful that that some people in academia are really, willing to step out and spend a lot of time on it. So our next awardee is not an individual, but an organization. And this is something that almost every year we have one or two awardees that are a nonprofit organization that is working alongside, working at some intersection of our mission. And this year, that organization is Climate Generation. Climate Generation is a Minneapolis-based nonprofit that seeks to build climate literacy and action among educators, youth, and the broader public. It is a great resource for educators. It provides climate science curriculum, professional learning opportunities for teachers, and networking opportunities for educators interested in teaching about climate change. And that last part, the networking, is so important because teachers can be pretty isolated in their individual classrooms and in their schools, especially if there's someplace where climate change is controversial in their community. So having the ability to network with other like-minded teachers is really important. Climate Generation is represented today by Nicole Rahm, the organization's executive director. Nicole?
Great. Thank you, Anne, for that wonderful introduction. We are so grateful to the National Center for Science Education for recognizing us with this honor. And of course, we're honored to accept this award. Just a little bit of history. We were established by National Geographic polar explorer and educator Will Steger in 2006 out of his concern over the lack of education and action on climate change. And we were really born out of his eyewitness experience with climate change from 50 years of expeditions. And as we all know, we're all eyewitnesses and experiencing climate change in our own backyard. So for over 15 years, Climate Generation has been empowering individuals and their communities to engage in solutions to climate change. And we have a vision of a world actively engaged in equitable solutions. As Anne mentioned, we've really been at the forefront of supporting educators by building their comfort and confidence to teach climate change from an interdisciplinary perspective in any educational setting, so formal and non-formal classrooms, since 2006. Our flagship Summer Institute for Climate Change Education provides teachers with intensive professional development, and we follow that up with support during the school year through our Teach Climate Network, which is over 12,000 educators strong and growing, reaching every corner of the US, as well as outside of the US in North America and beyond. And as Anne mentioned, in addition to professional development and training, we provide instructional resources and curriculum to meet the needs of teachers, from green STEM careers to climate science to addressing the intersections of climate change with civics, social studies, and social justice education. We've been longtime partners of NCSE since they established a climate change education program. And we're similarly honored to host former NCSE Executive Director Jeannie Scott at our 7th Summer Institute in 2012, and to have built on our partnership to overcome misinformation and disinformation, which we know is ever present in climate change education and beyond. I'll close with just saying I'm honored to accept this award on behalf of our board and staff, and I want to acknowledge our education team in particular, from Kristen Poppleton and Lindsay Kirkland, who have managed and grown the program, to our education staff that are joining us tonight, Marie Fargo and Seth Spencer. We're absolutely committed to working together to advance climate literacy and action for the benefit of future generations. So thank you for this recognition and partnership.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Yeah, this has been a very, very fruitful partnership for a long time. Our sixth awardee, unfortunately, was not able to be with us tonight, but Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson is the founder of the nonprofit think tank Urban Ocean Lab. She also co-founded the climate initiative, the All We Can Save project, and also is co-creator of the podcast How to Save a Planet. And in her spare time, she's a marine biologist. And we thank her so much for both her tireless work as a marine biologist and for all of her efforts related to climate policy, activism, and communication. And we're really sorry that she couldn't be here with us tonight. Um, so just to close, I just want to say that, I mentioned before that NCSE started its life as an evolution education advocacy group. It added climate change about a dozen years ago. And this year, in the face of the pandemic in the last 2 years, as we've seen, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the capacity of a great many Americans to evaluate the scientific information that they get and to decide what's real and what's fake, to decide what is based on good evidence and what is a conspiracy theory is seriously lacking. An understanding of really how science works, the nature of science is a mile wide and a nanometer deep. And so we have added to our mission now the nature of science, and we have started developing a curriculum that teachers can use to teach the nature of science. It's all storylined in accordance with NGSS, best NGSS practices on epidemiology and virology. And so we currently have 30 teachers across the country testing this curriculum to show to try to show that it makes them more confident in teaching about the nature of science and that it overcomes the students' misconceptions about how science works. So in keeping with a science organization, we're actually doing science to make sure that what we're doing works. I am distressed to report that we've had a couple teachers who had agreed to teach this curriculum come to us and say, I don't quite see how I'm going to do that this year because I've been told not to teach about masks or not to teach about vaccines or not to teach about viruses because it is too political. So that is, of course, deeply, deeply distressing. And we are working with those teachers to try to figure out what's the most effective thing they can do in terms of either pushing back on that directive or modifying our curriculum so that they feel comfortable teaching it. But that kind of interference in what what science teachers do in their classroom is, of course, the tip of the iceberg. And we do worry that as people feel empowered to show up at board meetings and say, or board, school board meetings and complain about a particular novel or worry about their kids being taught something that they're not even being taught, that the next step might indeed be to come in and say, we don't want our kids to learn about climate change, or we don't want them to learn about evolution or masks or vaccines or all of the things that students really, really need to understand if they're going to grow up to be well-informed citizens who can contribute to policy discussions based on real information rather than that they can distinguish between good information that they find on the internet or hear from a friend and bad information. So I'm afraid that rather than being able to say, okay, 40 years solved our problem, we're out of here, NCSE, it looks like, is going to be around for a while, helping increasingly working with teachers to provide them with the resources they need, again, to teach these topics confidently, to create a community among them so that they can support each other in that effort, and to try teacher by teacher to improve what our students are learning so that they come out of high school really understanding how science works and how they can put it to use in their own lives. We also continue to do all of the things that some of you mentioned, especially Jason, that we keep an eye out for any efforts to interfere with what's being taught in the science classroom, whether that's state legislation or efforts to water down science standards. efforts to not use certain textbooks or resources. We are always interested if you hear anything going on that makes you wonder if it's right. We will investigate and we will try to help. We really have a long history of intervening in a way that is, again, respectful of the teachers' interests in their community, respectful of the people who disagree with us, because that's the only way that we're going to really be able to make a difference in these communities. So we will continue to do that. We also have a research program where we conduct our own research on what's going on in classrooms, including several national surveys looking at classroom teaching practices that not only inform our own work, but I think let the wider world know the kinds of challenges that teachers are facing, and the kinds of problems that may be going on with teachers giving students inaccurate information. So, we are carrying on and even expanding what we're doing, but we just can't do it without people like you. And so we're just so grateful that you are also out there on the ramparts with us.